Okay, then we will go ahead and get started. Thank you both for coming in. The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to welcome some guests to discuss State Ballot Initiative 1366, which is on the ballot this November. We will go ahead and I'll let you introduce yourself just very quickly, and then we'll go on from there. Let's start. Ed?
I'm Ed Orcutt. I'm a state representative from the 20th Legislative District. I am the assistant ranking, formerly the ranking member on the House Finance Committee, which deals with tax policy issues.
Great, and you will be speaking in favor of...
I will be speaking in favor of 1366.
Great, and Rob?
I'm Rob Lutz. I've been teaching for 9 years at Heritage High School as a social studies teacher. I've got a daughter in the Vancouver Public Schools, and I've taught in Evergreen Public Schools, and I serve currently as the president of the Evergreen Education Association.
Okay, great. Thank you both for coming in. I should note that Tim Iman, who sponsored the initiative, was scheduled to be with us today and was not able to make it. And we might be expecting Mark Johnstead. Okay, we hope that he can join us. And just so you know, we are videotaping this for use on our website. We post all of our editorial board meetings unedited for the benefit of our readers. I'd like to start by reading the ballot title. Obviously, it's very kind of bare bones, won't give us a lot of detail on it, but just to get us started. The Initiative 1366 concerns state taxes and fees. This measure would decrease the sales tax rate unless the legislature refers to voters a constitutional amendment requiring 2/3 legislative approval or voter approval to raise taxes and legislative approval for fee increases. So that just gives us a little foundation from which to start. So I think we'll start with Ed and tell us, why should voters enact this measure?
Well, first of all, voters have enacted the 2/3 vote requirement for tax increases 5 times. It actually goes back to 1993 with Linda Smith in Initiative 601. And every time that the voters have approved this, it's been by a larger and larger majority. The voters clearly are tired of the same old solutions in Olympia, which is just raise taxes. They want legislators to make the hard choices. What are our priorities in this state? Set those priorities, fund those priorities, and then everything else has to be deemed extra. And if there's extra money, then you can fund those things. But the taxpayers can't just go to their bosses and demand a pay raise. Many have taken pay decreases over the last several years because of the Great Recession. There are people who are underemployed or still unemployed since the Great Recession. Things are changing, and they're not for the better in our economy. We need to turn our economy around, and higher taxes is not a way to do it. Giving employers, giving citizens some certainty that tax increases are going to be done only as a last resort, I think is critical, not only for them, for citizens to plan, for for families to plan their budgets, but for employers to plan their budgets and determine whether or not they're going to be able to hire people back on. I know employers who wanted to start hiring people back 3 or 4 years ago, but it was the uncertainty of whether or not the legislature was going to raise taxes or increase regulation that forced them to wait on hiring somebody back.
Now let's go back for a second. When you say the same old solutions out of Olympia, that strikes me as politician speak, because from the standpoint this year,
it's not politicians. It's factual.
Because this year the legislature didn't raise taxes. It seems to me, don't we elect people to make those hard decisions?
Yeah, we do. And actually taxes were increased this year. They were increased on a select few, and that's typically the way they do it. They will increase taxes on a select few, and they will spread it around. But if you look, almost everybody's been affected by a tax increase in the last 10 years.
So isn't that the legislature's job? Shouldn't we trust them that if there's a tax increase, then it's for the good of the state?
Well, if you're going to say that, then you're speaking against the initiative process entirely. The whole purpose of the initiative process is so that the citizens can put into place what the legislature wants.
Right, and you mentioned it's been passed 5 times.
That's right.
I believe once it was overturned by the legislature,
It's been suspended, it's been eliminated by the legislature.
and it's been declared unconstitutional by the courts.
I think it was
Couple of
declared
cases.
unconstitutional by the court once.
Okay. So, those seem like pretty good reasons why we don't have a 2/3 requirement on taxes.
Well, the court basically overturned it because it wasn't in the Constitution and said that if we wanted it, it should be in the Constitution. So this initiative is a step in getting it towards, getting it put into the Constitution. I have House Joint Memorial, or House Joint Resolution 4206. I've introduced that. It's not going anywhere. That is the constitutional amendment to embed the 2/3 vote requirement into the Constitution
Why isn't it going anywhere?
because the legislators won't do it, because the majority in Olympia won't do it,
Because they don't think it's a good idea.
because they don't want to do it, because they want to be able to raise taxes. They want it to be easy to raise taxes.
Wouldn't they, but why? Don't they want the ability to raise taxes because sometimes that's necessary for a well-functioning state?
They do want the ability to raise taxes.
Right.
But it isn't necessarily for the best function of the state. You may say, okay, well, these programs would function better if we had more money. But these programs aren't the state. The taxpayers have to be part of the equation, and they seem to be left out of the equation. And the only aspect they have in the equation is we're taking more from you, and we're giving it to someone else.
So,
And the taxpayers are tired of that. And they've spoken 5 times in the last 22 years and said, we want a 2/3 vote requirement. We want to make sure that it is the absolute last resort before taxes are raised.
so let's explain why, if this ballot measure does not pass, then the nuts and bolts of it, if the ballot measure does pass, and then the legislature decides not to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot for next year, then what would be the impact?
Well, the impact would be that we would take 1 cent off the sales tax, and so it would be at 5.5% instead of 6.5% on the state portion. And then we would have to reduce budgets. And we would have to
How
truly
much revenue does that translate into?
I've been told it's around $1 billion.
So if that happens, the voters pass I-1366, legislature does not put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, then the state loses roughly $1 billion in tax revenue. Where would you find that $1 billion? What programs would you advocate cutting?
Well, I wouldn't advocate for cutting programs. I would advocate for putting the constitutional amendment out to voters.
But let's say that they don't.
Well, that's what I'm going to advocate for. And I think that's the wisest decision that the legislature could make when given those 2 options.
Do you think voters would pass it?
I think they would.
So,
Well, let's hear the other side.
okay, we'll move on. Rob, tell us why voters should not pass this.
Voters should not pass it. Well, for one, it's somewhat blackmail, for lack of a better term. At least it feels like it to me. Do this or don't. Do it or suffer the consequences. We're already, naturally I've got my daughter in class, but lately in the Vancouver public school system, where they already had a budget fight over having counselors in the classroom, or not in the classroom, but in the building, enough of them, already kind of grasping at straws for enough resources. The state's already in contempt for not fully funding education. And those fights take place because the state's already not sending the proper monies down. I disagree with the representative that there's extra money floating around in the state level that they're putting in the wrong spots, and that's why they're not fully funding education. Not fully funding education because the money's not there at this moment. I don't know anybody from either side of the aisle that doesn't support education. Everybody supports education, whether it's the bedrock of our community or state and our national level of government. If the people want a constitutional amendment, they tell the representatives to pass the constitutional amendment there. The Constitution shouldn't be amended so easy as a simple majority vote. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're reversing the process here. Instead of them pushing their representatives, resulting in a supermajority saying, yes, this needs to be a constitutional amendment, pass it, and then send it to the people to make sure they got it right, they're effectively telling you, you will change the difficulty in passing a constitutional amendment. You will send it to the people first, or you won't have this tax money and you won't be able to do these different programs. My daughter's a first grader, so I'm hoping to get things changed over the years so that my daughter doesn't go through a school system with lack of funding forever. And so under the McCleary decision, so we're going to end up having to put more money into education. And then on top of that, potentially either cut taxes or not raise taxes without a very serious hurdle to get over. Then we're going to have to cut somewhere else. And frankly, I sleep well at night in this community knowing the police are available, the fire department's available, the public services are available. I don't know that they can be. The other problem I think that could come from this, just thinking while I was listening to the representative speak, you could wind up in the same situation we already have in the school districts, where the haves have and the have-nots don't. If you end up in a situation where the state can't raise money anymore, and you have to cut the sales tax, you could have communities that feel like they can't afford to raise their own local taxes to pay for certain things, and they might do that instead. You end up in the same situation we have in the school districts, where those that can or have a supportive populace willing to spend the money do, and those that can't or don't have the services they need.
But how do you answer, I mean, we know the genesis of this particular ballot measure. The genesis is that a number of times the general public has voted in favor of the idea of 2/3 majority of the state legislature is needed to pass tax increases. And the genesis of this ballot measure is for a variety of different reasons, despite the fact that the general public has voted in favor of it, i.e. they favor it. It hasn't been instituted. What do you say to the majority of voters who want this, who say they want this? What do you say to them as to here's why you don't get it?
Well, for one, I go back to that you can put pressure on your local legislature to vote accordingly, and that you can get it, and through that process. There's a process we have to do that. We don't have a direct democracy for everything, for that reason. Another thing is those other ballots that we have passed in the past, admittedly I did not vote for, but I was in the minority in all those, well, some of them. Back far enough, it's before I could vote even, I think. They also weren't under a situation where the state has been found in contempt of court with respect to proper funding of education. We weren't in a situation where we had court rulings about not taking care of our mental disabilities in our institutions as well. So we were in a different situation in the past as well in those situations.
Right, but I mean, I get what you're saying. Under the representative form of government, somehow or another, this majority should be able to convince the people who they elected to do what they want. They're the majority, so says the ballot measures that have done in the past. That doesn't seem to translate to the state legislature, because the state legislature isn't doing what the majority of voters are asking them to do. And I guess the only answer that you have to that is, well, you're going to have to do a better job of convincing your legislators if that's what you want to have happen.
It's the same problem I run into a lot of times with education issues as well, in many cases. I mean, it is one of the ways the system works, ultimately. And this isn't the way to do it. I mean, this way of do it, or else we're going to cut funding is not the appropriate way to do it either. It's I used the word blackmail earlier, and it's more or less what it is.
I'm curious, Ed, in your time in the legislature, have you ever seen an initiative or ballot measure like this that, like Rob referred to as blackmail?
This is the first time I have seen an initiative put on the ballot that gives the legislature options. Every other initiative says, you're going to do this. This initiative gives them an option. You can do this or this.
What kind of option is that? It's do this or get $1 billion in state funding cut.
I think it's a good option. And back to the gentleman's point about, telling the legislature what they want, passing this initiative is a very, very strong message of what the voters want. And that's one of the best ways to inform the legislators of what you do want. And quite frankly, they've been telling the legislature, and the legislature keeps overturning it, keeps ignoring it. And I think that's why they need an initiative like this that comes in and says, we want to vote. If you're not going to give us a chance to vote, to protect ourselves from tax increases, then decrease our taxes now. And I don't think that's an unfair thing for the citizens, the tax-paying citizens of this state to ask of the legislature.
Well, I mean, if you don't mind kind of playing that out just a little bit, I mean, anytime you start attaching if this, then this statements to your ballot measures, I mean, to the absurd, which to me this feels a little bit absurd, but to the absurd, you could have situations with fully funded education as ordered by the courts, or we're going to sell the executive mansion and not fund legislator salaries. I mean, it becomes where your legislature is effectively non-existent if you want to play that way.
And what message would it send if voters don't pass 1366?
Then I think.
Do you think that would say we want higher taxes?
I think the legislature would say, hey, they just gave us the green light to raise taxes. And I'm very concerned that would be the route that they would go. And, we keep hearing about the problem with education funding. Do you realize that in 2006 in the supplemental budget, that there was an additional $1.8 billion added into that supplemental budget, only 18% of which went to fund higher ed or K-12 education. The legislature made a choice to fund something other than education, and it was a bad choice.
What was that they funded?
They funded social services, more state employees, everything but education. And they called it an education budget. When higher ed and K-12 was getting 54% of the budget, the increase they only got 18% of. And they called it an education
Did
budget.
you say 2006?
It was in the supplemental. It's back when we had the housing bill.
I mean, Ed, you would agree that there's need out there. Let's look at transportation, for example, roads.
Well, it's a separate budget.
No, okay. It is a separate. It is a separate budget. At the end of the day, the state does need money for things like transportation. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, and you do realize that it takes a 60% supermajority to pass the bonds to enact the tax package that was just passed. 60%.
Right.
That's a
Right.
requirement in our legislature.
Right, right. I'm just trying to get to this idea that if we're not going to raise taxes, generally speaking.
It's not saying that you won't raise
Right.
taxes. It just says that before you raise taxes, in order to raise taxes, you either have to have one of two things happen. One, you have to have a 2/3 majority vote by the legislature to enact those, or you have to put those out to the voters to approve, and that's approved with a simple majority vote.
Right.
And by the way, the comment about changing the threshold for a constitutional amendment, it would still take a 2/3 vote to advance that out of the legislature to the citizens to vote on. It doesn't change that threshold at all.
Right.
Right. The likelihood is if it passes, it would be the 1% decrease in sales tax.
No, I think the likelihood is that the legislature would put it out to a vote of the citizens.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to say I don't think it would. I mean, one of the problems with this on the reverse side of that is that it puts 17 people in the Senate, effectively can sink anything, including sending that out to the people. So even if the vast majority of that group thought, we're gonna have to do this, we're gonna have to send it out there, because we've got no choice. 17 people would end up killing you, I think, it wouldn't end up going out to people, it would end up indeed with a reduction in taxes.
Well, then that's the legislature making the decision.
Not 17 people making the decision.
No, it's the entire legislature.
But, and, okay, that goes back to the original point. Shouldn't we count on the legislature to make these decisions?
Well, and that goes back to my point that you just made a case to get rid of the entire initiative system altogether. And that's not a way I'm willing to go.
No, I don't think I'm making that case. I think there
You
are
basically
certain
are.
things, there are certain things, like budgets, where it's reasonable to expect our legislatures to be the experts on it. Let's face it, how many citizens spend much time going through the state budget, looking at the revenue, looking at the revenue sources, looking at where that money goes? That's your job. I think it's easy, like we have an issue here that came up the other day. It would be reasonable if the city council decided to put fireworks to a vote of the people. Fireworks are something people can understand. Fireworks are something everybody has an opinion on. But when it comes to budgets, we need experts to a certain extent. We can't expect Joe Citizen to have that level of expertise.
I don't think you're giving the taxpayers enough credit. I think the taxpayers are quite sophisticated in this state. And I think they're sophisticated enough to know when the legislature is trying to pull the wool over their eyes. I see it all the time.
Give me an example.
I'm just telling. There have been numerous proposals to raise taxes,
Mhm.
and it's all because we need the money for education.
Mhm.
And a lot of these taxpayers will look and go, well, wait a minute, what are you doing with this other money that's for education? And they recognize that the legislature has taken money that supposedly was going to go to education. They moved it somewhere else and then said, now we need more money for education.
Give me an
And-
example of that since McCleary in 2012.
Well, since McCleary, I couldn't give you one right off the top of my head. I can give you an example of where they've done it in my tenure in the legislature, and that was with the estate tax. Money from the estate tax was supposed to be going into education, and then recently they've taken that out and used it somewhere else and said we need more money for education. They've done it with.
You say recently,
They've done
when
it
was
for.
that?
They've done it for. I can't tell you the exact date. They've done it with money that was supposed to be going into. Well, actually, it was the estate tax that they said they needed for education because they'd taken money out of 728 funds and put it somewhere else, and then backfilled with the estate tax. That's the type of things that legislators do. They put money somewhere else and then say, oh, we need money for education. And this is one of the things that we've talked about, you've heard me talk about time and time again. We ought to fund education first. But if you're saying that we're going to fund all these other things and now we need a tax increase to fund education, you just funded education last. And that's the wrong decision.
But again, there were no direct tax increases last session.
There was a
gas tax.
general tax
Right.
increase for the operating budget, but there were tax increases. And if you look back, there have been very few years when there hasn't been some sort of a tax increase in the state legislature. And it may be as simple as going back to the early 2000s when they increased the profit that the state got off of liquor. That's basically a tax on the people that are purchasing liquor without calling it a liquor tax.
Okay, but
there
again,
have been numerous other ways where they have raised taxes. They've raised cigarette taxes. They've raised alcohol taxes. They've raised, I can't even tell you the whole list of them. It's been a little while since I've gone back and looked at the list, but it wasn't that long ago that I did. And it's like every other year there's some sort of tax that's being increased. And you may not know about it because it may be embedded in something else.
So Republicans this year are being disingenuous when they brag about not raising taxes.
They didn't raise any general taxes.
Rob,
But when you eliminate a tax incentive, that is by definition a tax increase.
you know, we're all taxpayers, Rob. Do you think people are generally frustrated with their taxes that they have to pay?
Generally frustrated. I think they might be frustrated with the process. We can't seem to get anything done. But I'm not going to say frustrated. I don't know. I'm not going to speak for people. I can speak for myself that when I vote for a local levy, for example, that I'm happy with the money spent for that purpose. But I go back a little bit. I mean, we're talking about the people making these types of decisions. My grandmother, bless her heart, I love her. She's awesome. She's 84 years old in 8th grade education from Carroll's elementary and middle school up in Kelso at that point in time.
Can I see a picture, please?
My grandmother or Carol's?
A few grandmothers floating around this.
Yeah. But what I do know is she wants her great granddaughter to have quality education, but she's not going to be able to figure out the budget and understand what she's voting for and have an informed decision on that piece. She can hold an individual responsible. So as you pointed out, representative is putting, voting to put money elsewhere that doesn't belong, not in education where it should have went in that case, as you pointed out. She can hold that individual responsible, but to hold her responsible for trying to figure out whether she should increase taxes or not because of something is, I think, a little false. I think everybody's always frustrated. I mean, we all have different priorities. Everyone's always frustrated with where their money goes. We all pay taxes. We want it to go to what we think is the right spots. And the representative and I are probably going to disagree sometimes on where the taxes go, whether it's the right spots or not. You and I are going to disagree from time to time. You and I, everyone's always frustrated. They think money goes in the spots they don't want it to go in. I don't know if that answered your question. I think in general, that's just the natural rule. Everybody's frustrated with their taxes they pay, always.
So would you extend that argument to suggest that the referendum system shouldn't be used in the state because it's kind of a duplication of another process?
I'm not going to extend that argument, no. But in the referendum process, at that point in time, at least the legislators send it to the people as opposed to being blackmailed to send it to the people. A little bit a different process in this case.
Ed, how many other states have a 2/3 requirement for tax increases?
I can't answer that question, I don't know.
You know of any?
But I don't. I'm sure they're out there, I just don't know which states they are. I think Colorado had Tabor for a while, I'm not sure if that's still enacted, and I don't remember all the provisions of it. But we have, but the point is, we have a number of provisions in our code now that require supermajority for tax increases. We do it for school bonds, we do it for most levies. If we do something that's bonds in the state legislature for capital construction or for transportation, it requires a 60% supermajority vote. If we want to refer something to the citizens for a constitutional amendment, it takes a 2/3 vote for us to do that. There are reasons for it, because it should be hard to do certain things. And taxes are one of those things that should be hard to do. That's why I think a 2/3 vote requirement is a reasonable thing. I think it's reasonable protection for the citizens of this state, for employers of this state, to give them some certainty as to what their business model will be able to do and what they can do. They've got to do some planning in out years, and if they don't know if a tax is going to be increased, it makes it impossible for them to plan.
So you say some certainty, so what you're saying is there would never be tax increases, that the 2/3 would effectively abolish all tax increases?
No, it wouldn't necessarily abolish all tax increases, but it would reduce the likelihood, which reduces risk, which gives employers more certainty.
Well, certainty isn't the same as reduces the risk.
It gives them, well, if you have more certainty, you have lower risk.
Constitutional amendments should in and of themselves be difficult to do as well, as you pointed out. And this reverses the process, I think. It says you will do this or else. It takes away the difficulty of creating a constitutional amendment this way. Again, taking it to the absurd, this cuts 1%, but you could in theory cut 3%. You could get rid of sales tax if you don't make this amendment or send this to the people anyway to make this amendment to the Constitution.
I just don't see that it's blackmail. I see it as giving legislators two options, where initiatives in the past have only left them with one.
So do you think any legislators would actually consider not sending it to the ballot and taking the 1% hit on sales tax?
There would be some that would try to hold out for that, but I think in the end, we would have enough votes to advance it to the November ballot.
Have you seen any polls on this at all?
I haven't.
No. So you don't have any, either of you have any
I've not
sense
seen
of
any polls.
how this?
Well, I have a lot of
will affect-
sense, I just don't have numbers.
Well, not that. Yeah, okay, so as far as you guys are aware, we're not sure what the general public is trending.
I'm not sure we're sure even when we do have polls, but no, we don't have any polls either.
All right, now
Thank you.
I'll pull it up.
The only poll is the election itself.
Yeah.
That's the best one.
Now, Rob, I'm curious, in being involved with this issue, what, I assume that you talk to people, talk to coworkers, talk to people in the public. What sense are you getting about 1366? Do you think, do people understand the issue and the process?
Admittedly, I mean, if I started talking to them, when I start talking to people about 1366, first of all, when I say 1366, they probably don't even know what I'm talking about at this moment in time. I start to explain it a little bit. A lot of times, oh, that's the Tim Hyman bill? Yes, it's the Tim Hyman initiative. And I mean, that's usually how it's identified if I'm talking to people. I don't think yet, I mean, as we get closer and closer to elections, how it always
Sure.
works, people will start thinking more about it.
Actually, and that reminds me of a question, Ed, with this being a Tim Hyman measure, why should voters think that it won't be overturned by the courts? He has a long history of having his initiatives overturned.
Well, I think the message we got from the court when the 2/3 was overturned the last time was, their concern was that it wasn't embedded in the Constitution.
Right.
So I think that when this is, when the voters approve this, then we put it out to a vote of the citizens. The citizens either approve it or don't, and then that resolves the issue. And I think they will, and I think it will be put embedded into the Constitution where it should be.
Anything else? Great, any final statements, Rob?
Other than, I too think the voters, I give the voters credit. I don't think, I won't speak with certain, I don't think the voters will pass it. I think the voters are smart enough to see that it's blackmail, that ultimately can see that it's going to hurt services of some sort. You have to pick which one. If you had to cut it, you cut where you're going to cut. And the Tim Hyman piece doesn't help matters any either for trying to get it passed. And I think people will see that it potentially could be overturned by the courts. So I don't think it will pass.
Yeah.
So I think it's funny everybody keeps referring to Tim Hyman on this. But this originally, the 2/3 vote, actually was done by Linda Smith with Initiative 601 in 1993, 4 or 5 years before I ever even heard of Tim Hyman. This is something that the citizens have embraced for 22 years. They have desired, they have demanded, and they deserve to have a 2/3 vote requirement. And it's not absolute 2/3 vote requirement of the legislature, because with a simple majority vote of the legislature, they could refer it to the voters for approval. And so it's another situation where they have options, just like there are options within this initiative. When this is embedded into the Constitution, then the legislature will have options. They can either get a 2/3 majority vote of the legislators to enact it, or they can put it out to a vote of the people to enact it. There are choices.
Great, well, gentlemen, thank you very much.
That's good.
All right.